Oh,
Well, it's recording and it's Saturday morning, and I'm here with my friend Christina, and she agreed to do a step one discussion. And I felt it was important because when I was in my recovery, I don't think I looked at podcasts, but it didn't really seem like there was a specific, like I could go listen to people talk, like rant about how did step one feel outside of just regular meetings where you're really only hearing 3 minutes a piece from each person, 3 to 5 minutes. And it doesn't really, unless you have a sponsor already, um, or you're already including yourself in a step group, then you just don't really get it. So, yeah, I'd love to hear. Well, I mean, I'll tell you how it felt for me because I've done a couple of different fellowships for step one, but Christina, you want to share a little bit about what that felt like coming to the terms of like, okay, I'm going to do the 12 steps and
yeah, sure. So I was first brought to CODA. I was very familiar with the word codependency and I understood what it meant. And I worked with a therapist to kind of process some of those things. But really, I started exploring more in depth the codependency, the step group, the step work in the heart of the pandemic. So back in like May and June of 2019, that's when I really started to get into this whole step work and just an introduction as to what it was. I have never been through any sort of step program, so it was all very, very unfamiliar to me. While I knew about AA and I knew about other programs, I'd never personally gone through one of those things. So it was all very, very unfamiliar. And so, really, it was what helped me was just attending some CODA meetings and listening to people share and just get familiar with like, what does this even mean? Like, I didn't even understand. So a lot of it took me through just a process of exploration. I'm totally a learner, so I love to gather new information. And so for me, just the first part of the step process was just me reading and looking into what it all meant, what it was. I like to know the reasoning and the rationale behind things. So for me, the first step was just learning about it and kind of understanding how does this apply to me. So that was like my first step into steps, if that makes sense.
yeah. Did your therapist say, oh, you need to read Melanie Beattie's book?
Well, I would say back when I first started, when I was in therapy, she had recommended, she was the first one who actually brought up the term codependency. And we were talking about things and she's like, have you ever heard of this term? And I said, no. And so she really kind of explained it. I was like, oh my God, that really is me. Like, whoa. So she had started reading the language of letting go, the affirmations, the daily affirmations. And so we would start off in our therapy session, we would read that day. And so that was my first kind of introduction to that was I got that book and I started reading it and how each day I felt like Melody Beattie was like talking directly to me. And I still feel that every day, every time I still read it daily. So that was my first step. And then I didn't even realize that she had other books.
Yeah.
So once I found that out, then I started to read it. But that took a while. Like I didn't immediately go and read those books. So no one really ever told me to go read those books. It was more of a personal thing that it was just kind of, it led me down that path.
Yeah. But like you found her name because the therapist said,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, for me, I mean, my first fellowship was Alcoholics Anonymous, and that was when I was a teenager, and I didn't feel I related. I couldn't relate because it was in person, and I live in a small town, so it's mostly like old men that smoke a lot and drink a lot of dirty, weird smelling coffee and dirty couches and you know, I just couldn't relate. Like I enjoyed hearing what other people had to say, but I couldn't tell. I didn't walk away thinking I have a lifelong problem and I'm just like these people. So I didn't see this. I didn't see the similarities at that time. So another thing that made me believe that is I had an eating disorder prior to having switched from addictions like controlling food to drinking. And I had overcome the eating disorder, and all those white coats said, you'll have this the rest of your life. You need to be on all these different meds. And I blew that out of the water. So in my head, I'm like, I'm more powerful than this stigma, this label. And I ran with that for many years. So coming back into the program, and I'm so grateful that it was all online. Did you feel that way, that you were like,
Yeah. And I think when you were talking, there was a couple of things. Yeah. So as I had said previously, like I was first introduced during the pandemic when everyone was home. We were all kind of scared to do anything or go out, but we were all so striving for connection at the same time. It's like we were all so scared, but we all still wanted to connect in some fashion. And so that was a lifesaver for me. And yeah, so like I thought, I don't think that I would be where I am if I didn't have the online meetings, because frankly, I would have never met you because we met via online.
yeah,
And the other thing that was helpful for me is the meeting that I started attending was strictly for women. And so that, like when you were talking about how going in person and you really couldn't relate to men and it just different stages of their lives and just whatever, I felt that when I attended these meetings with women, I felt like we were all in different stages, but we all kind of had similar stories. There were definitely different things going on, but we all had these defining things that really kind of wove us together. So I felt that was so powerful. Because I don't know if I would have felt the same if I was connected in a CODA group initially with men as well. I think it was really helpful and comforting just to have women in my group.
that's a good point to bring up. The way that I found the online, well, I looked at, like, I was looking for meetings online and it just didn't seem as user friendly to me to go directly to the fellowships.
Mhm.
So I kind of gave up. Like I saw, like, in everybody's town, and I'm like, well, I don't really want to go to any in my town. So I was looking at other places, and they
Mhm.
have to, I don't know, it just seemed more complicated to me. So I gave up. And then I had started going to therapy, and my therapist said the same thing. Have you heard the term codependency? And in my head, I had just kind of coupled it with what's it called when you like an overeater, like the family giving them food.
Enabling.
Yeah, I had coupled it with enabling, and I didn't really have a broader definition. And she started talking about it, and I got the Codependent No More book.
Mhm.
And I'm just like reading this laundry list of characteristics. I'm like, oh my God. And I found it very comforting, actually, that my behavior is textbook, that I have been studied, that this isn't new. This is a whole community of people that have felt this and couldn't figure it out and just thought they were crazy. Or so, having started with one fellowship, I quickly felt that the deeper work for me, I was going to find in Codependence Anonymous, which is called CODA, CODA. And I'm an alternative medicine person. I never like to go the direct Western medicine route. So automatically I'm like, what if there's like yoga recovery. So that's where my brain went. So I start Googling yoga and recovery, and because I didn't want to do the regular 12 steps. I didn't connect to it the first time. So I found this woman that teaches yoga recovery, and kind of like meetings that are set up where people share. And at the end, they do a breathing meditation and some yoga moves. But she had cited on her website intherooms.com. And that's where I found my primary fellowships, where I could be like, Edward Norton and Brad Pitt in, Fight Club, where I could just kind of like smorgasbord and buffet all these different kinds of fellowships and figure out where I fit in. So I felt that was a really amazing tool to get there. But as far as working into your step one, which would be in CODA, I have the 12 steps here, is the first step is we admitted we were powerless over others, that our lives had become unmanageable. So do you remember what kind of your hurdles or what was like stopping you, or what process you felt?
It was just almost so overwhelming when I first started that step, because I have been so conditioned in my own way for 40 some years that it really made me start to question everything in my life and all of the relationships in my life, and really looking at each dynamic of those relationships and really kind of like dissecting it in a way of like, oh boy, like I like how much of my codependency has infiltrated into those relationships and the dynamics of that, and how far I've controlled and manipulated and people pleased and done all these things to try to control the relationships and the relationship dynamics. So it really was just pulling back and almost being like this outside observer of my life and of my relationships and how I interact with people. And then realizing like, oh boy, I am completely powerless over all of this. And I have put so much energy into trying to control it, and it's exhausting. So for me, it was kind of just looking at everything in my life, which was very overwhelming and exhausting in itself, because it was just like I had to really look at every single thing that I was doing to try to like tease out, like, what have I been trying to control? What have I been doing that isn't working? And how is that leading to this powerlessness and unmanageability that has led me to this point? I don't know if that makes any sense, but like, the first step was really like, what is going on?
Yeah. I definitely relate to where you're like, have to like kind of surreally step back at like, what? Like what I thought was how to live is not how to live, because it's become unmanageable, extremely unmanageable. For me, it like you said, you have to identify what relationships and what behaviors, but lately, well, and at the time, I couldn't get to the point where I'm thinking, but why? But why am I doing this? Why did I get into these dynamics? So definitely delving into the way your upbringing and that default way of being, and then being aware, like you're being unplugged from the matrix. Like now you're like, what? Life wasn't what I thought. Like what we thought was normal. I think you and I had talked about, is it okay if I share a little mom dynamic? Yeah. That I was taught, and I think I've heard you say similar, that in order to have a full relationship, you need to share everything. And that was one of the things that I figured out, like, that's actually very unhealthy and hurts other people. And I think it betrays other relationships in your life, because it's like you're sharing too much, and it's just too much to share, and not everybody needs to know everything. So that,
I think the other thing that, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. If you
no, not at all.
Okay. I have been so outwardly focused for all of my life that, like, to actually stop and turn it around onto me was another big thing. Is that I have done that in therapy and things like that, but like to really turn the lens away from everybody else, all the noise of my family, my husband, my daughter, my mom and dad, everybody, and really just focus on me was so hard to do.
Yeah. That deflect. And I really think that it doesn't matter what addiction it is, it's all about running away from yourself. How do I concentrate on something else? How do I create a distraction somewhere else? And I feel the same way about the drinking that I did. It was all about getting out of, like, completely zoning out from myself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And in turn, what it did is it blocked me from, my higher power. It put a weird slime over me so that I could not connect. And my only connection to other people was to only concentrate on them, away from myself. And something my mom brought up, because I've been piecemealing a little bit of recovery information to her. And I said, I was talking about loving, I can't think right now, when you love somebody over here.
Like loving kindness.
Like, instead of me taking responsibility for somebody's life and saying, I'm going to take responsibility for detach with love.
Oh.
I was kind of explaining the detach with love stuff to her. And she goes, so I go, Mom, have you noticed you're focusing on people? That's actually an addiction. And, to not just think about how you feel about it, that you're, thinking you can control and be the support. She says, but I love my family and I love my friend. I love everybody. She hadn't, and I think that's exactly my reaction, excuse me, to when I thought that I had to admit that I was powerless over others, that my way of loving wasn't loving. And that was just like rocked my world. Like, me caring, I care about these people. So of course I'm going to be involved in their life. It was very hard for me to discern, how do I be loving and supportive without taking responsibility for their stuff?
Mm-hmm.
And recognizing that it's unhealthy. Mm-hmm. You're like, what?
Yeah, I agree with that completely, because I feel like in my family too, is like, that's how you show love. That's exactly how you show love. So if you don't do that, then what do you do? Like that, it just blows your mind, because again, it's like, this is what has always been done. So then what do you do? And I think, just kind of going back to what you were saying, it's like, I feel like with step one, it really showed how detached I was from my own self, how detached I was from my own emotions, from my own body, from my own wants, and not even like, this whole process has been such a journey of like realizing that I don't even know what my wants are. I don't even know what my needs are. Like, I wasn't even able to define those at that point, because I was so outwardly focused and so worried about what everybody else was doing. It was just like a deflection for myself. And in some way, it was a way for me to remain numb. It was a way for me to remain numb to myself so that I don't have to feel, so I don't have to process things, so I don't have to do anything, because that's where all the hard work is like turning it around and looking at yourself and going, uh-oh, I got a lot of work to do because I don't even know myself.
Yeah, well, my cat wants out. Oh, cat. She wanted to stay and now she's got to go. So I just want to touch a little bit on AA, since I have another fellowship. And I mean paying homage to them because they started the whole process. So when I had to figure out one piece that I wanted to share of what a very powerful tool that helped me change my point of view on where I could find the similarities with other people was, it's called The Doctor's Opinion. Did you ever read it?
No.
It's very interesting. So I mean, people listening later, they can Google Alcoholics Anonymous, The Doctor's Opinion, or you can just put The Doctor's Opinion. And this is back in the 30s, and Dr. Silksworth, he's talking about how an addiction for alcohol, it's actually it's an obsession of the mind, and it's an allergy of the body. And he goes into, he doesn't have any of the science yet. That comes later. And it's basically like your pancreas can't handle it, and then your brain makes the wrong chemicals. So it is a physiological thing. And that went a huge way in my mind of convincing me that, okay, I can't have this because I'm allergic. It's like people who are allergic to shellfish. You can't have shellfish because you're freaking allergic. So, and then if we were to apply that, to humanity, like really, what would a codependent person be allergic to? Or what are we? I don't know. I don't know if that relates at all. But I just wanted to bring that up. That was something that was really important, that really shifted me into going, okay, it's not just in my head. I'm not just immoral. I don't have loose morals. It's just physiologically, and also my upbringing, having that obsession of the mind, my default of how I was raised and what was normal. So those two together is what created that behavior. So tell me, what are your favorite tools? Like, did you have like I had to have this book?
So my favorite tool is I have several. So the language of letting go, the daily affirmations is like, for me, it was just a very grounding, it's a grounding thing that I do every day that I read. And sometimes it resonates with me, sometimes it might not. And sometimes when I read it, I'm like, oh, I didn't even realize I needed that today. So that's something that I definitely use. But I also think that Codependent No More from Melody Beattie was like a life-changing book for me. And I've had it for years, and the amount of dog ears and highlighted and words written in the book, like I can reread that over and over and I still find some new little nugget to take away. So that's been a super helpful tool for me, because it did make me feel that I was not alone and that I'm not crazy, and that there's other people who feel the same way as me. With that, there's the Codependent No More workbook that was really helpful, because it does give you some guided prompts to help you work through like just the first step of just really starting to it just helps break things down and really starts to give you some ways to think about how your life is in working this step. So those are the big ones for me. I know that there's the Coda Blue book. I have the Coda Blue book. I honestly didn't find it as helpful. I mean, sometimes reading the stories, I don't find that one as I don't go to that one as much as I go to the other ones. So those were some helpful tools. And then also just going to a CODA meeting, and you don't have to participate, but just listening, because sometimes there are times that, one person's share will completely blow your mind and really make you feel like, whoa, we're living in an alternate reality together. So those are big tools. And then just to piggyback off of that, of just being with yourself and staying with yourself. And like, I've been trying to do my meditation, and that really helps me too. So.
Yeah. I think the first step for me in getting into like, okay, I'm going to commit to the recovery zone, was therapy. I think finding the right therapist. And if you go a handful of times and you're not jiving with them, and if you don't find yourself thinking about things that you talked about and you're like, wow, then it's not the right therapist. Gotta find a better one. I've had ones that I was like, I wasn't jiving with. So you got to move on. I recently found one that I love, and I think about things. So I'm like, whoa, this is amazing. Having a good therapist is like, so, and now everything's online. The world is your oyster to finding a therapist. So committing to therapy. And I really feel that being a part of a small group made the biggest difference.
Oh, I forgot to add that. Yeah, totally.
I mean, we found each other in the meetings, and created our small group where we could work the steps together and just do discussions just like this. That was kind of why I wanted to have these recordings, because what if you don't have a small group or whatever yet? This will help you see how helpful it is to just listen to other people's point of view, and healthy people. So, and good practice for boundaries and communication. So the small groups was really important to me. Getting a sponsor. So going in those meetings and listening to people talk and going, oh, they've been in recovery a long time, and I really admire, like they're shining the light. And you're like, the light. Those are the people you want help from. I don't have a sponsor in codependency, but I do in AA, and she's an emotionally aware person. So having one sponsor is good enough for me. And then, just staying connected in that way. But yeah, the step one, I have to do it, all the time. It's not like, oh, I did it. It's like you just keep it in your awareness, and the longer you're committed to your recovery, the more aware that you are, and it surprises you. And like you and I have talked about backsliding in behavior, and that's always a win too, because you realized it. Like before, we didn't know. So
yeah, it's like I have been living in step one probably for the last couple of months, of just going back and, not getting caught up in other people's behaviors and other people's reactions, and really going back and saying, like, I am powerless over this person. I'm powerless over this situation, because I cannot control someone else's actions. I can't control someone else's thoughts. And I'm also not responsible for that. They're responsible for that. So I feel like step one is like vital, and it almost needs to be done on a daily basis, because there's always I'm speaking for myself. When you're codependent, your initial response is to look outside and take care of other people and people please. And, so really it's like a daily thing that you have to keep coming back to. Like, okay, I'm getting caught up in this again. Step back. I'm powerless. So it's a very powerful step.
And those affirmation lists, that's something that I'll include, because I'm going to put a whole file underneath of this recording with tools and some things to look over. But the affirmation, that they help you figure out, like, okay, like you need to identify what relationships or what behaviors in your life are not working for your recovery, and you may have to reframe them. Like, I used to call everybody my friend. Everybody was my friend. If I've known you for 5 minutes, you're now my friend.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, what I would do for a friend is a lot. So there's many, many relationships that I needed to reframe, that they are an acquaintance. This is a coworker. Of what I am committed to that person for is very different per category, you know, and what it did was it freed me up, and I don't have to be responsible for many things. So that's something to look at also. And the affirmation list makes you go, oh, I am a wonderful person, and I don't need to do these things to prove myself to these people, because it doesn't mean anything to them. So
True.
Yeah. But I want to honor the time, and I'm so grateful. This is my confidant and amazing friend, and I can call you a friend.
Yes, I would say I think we're friends.
Yeah. And I'm so happy that we can do this discussion, and I think that it's a powerful tool, us opening our heart a little bit for people to hear this information, because it wasn't available, this kind of thing. So
yeah, and it's an awesome program, and I wouldn't be where I am without Kim and the other people in my group, because we really have, grown together and changed, and we're evolving women, but we've made so much progress over the last, year and a half of our lives, and just this crazy, crazy time that we're living in, where there's so much stress and pressure and so many areas of life, like all areas of life, of relationships and finances and outside health and, just education. Everything is just up in the air. So just having a small group of people who understand what you're going through and, are working through the same stuff as you on a different level, it's just so, so helpful.
Extremely.
Yeah, for sure.
God. Well, thank you so much, my friend.
Yes.
Have a beautiful day, and everyone else that's listening.
Bye.